Okay, I'm finally ready to leave my hiatus from Modern. I'm sure the Jace the Mind Sculptor banning has ruined the format, but let's go see the destruction. Jace? 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 Hello, and we are back doing modern deck techs. Now before we begin, I want to let you know that this is not a budget deck tech. So if you are here looking for a budget deck, try again next week, a week after that, something like that. But what this deck tech is 2 years of hard work. Yeah, I've been looking into this deck for years, even before the channel was made, and it's part of the reason why I made the channel, because I wanted to bring this janky ass combo to the masses, but I haven't been able to perfect it. At one point it was a pretty efficient glass cannon, but I didn't want a glass cannon, I wanted consistency. So this is what we have here, and if you don't like it, then get the fuck out. This is mental fertilizer. This deck has two goals, the first one being the mental part of mental fertilizer, forcing our opponents to shuffle their deck. We care about this because we're running these two cards. Psychogenic Probe is an artifact that says whenever someone shuffles their deck, it deals 2 damage to them. And Psychic Surgery says whenever an opponent shuffled their deck, we get to look at the top 2 cards of it and exile 1, allowing us to lock our opponents into a state where they don't draw anything of value. Psychogenic Probe is also nice because it turns fetching for a shock land from 3 damage into 5 damage, which is quite a bit to get 1 land. The second goal of this deck is to make our opponents search their library. This is because of nixilis Unshackled's ability that says whenever an opponent searches their library, they lose 10 life and sack a creature. So that means any fetch they crack, any tutor they use, they're going to lose 10 life if we have nixilis out. This is even more powerful if we have Fertilid out, a green creature that has a unique ability that says pay 1 and a green and remove a +1/+1 counter from it to make target player search their deck for a basic land, and it comes into play tapped. This will trigger nixilis' ability, and it will also trigger Psychogenic Probe's ability because they have to shuffle their deck afterwards. So that means by giving our opponent 1 tapped basic land, they'll lose 12 life. That's a good trade in my opinion. Part of the reason this deck wasn't working is because we didn't have enough ways to make our opponents search and shuffle their deck. But in recent sets, we've gotten much more ways to do so, like these. For black, blue, and 1, you get Unmoored Ego, which allows us to choose a card name, including basic lands, and search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name, and then we exile them. The player shuffles their deck, and then they get to draw a card for each card we removed from their hand. Lost Legacy is similar, except the card we name can't be an artifact or a land, and Dispossess is the same, except we can only choose an artifact card, but they don't get to draw a card if we remove a card from their hand, so sucks for them. Moving on, we have Extirpate and Surgical Extraction, which are basically built-in graveyard hate. They do the exact same thing as the past cards, except we can only choose a card from a graveyard and it can't be a basic land. Now these cards kind of act as sideboard cards built into the main deck because we can just name pieces of our opponent's deck that are essential and remove it from them while dealing damage to them. The downside is that you gotta know your opponent's deck, but in combo decks like KCI and Storm, you just name their win con and they're done. And most decks you can cripple like this. Dredge, you name Life of the Loam. Tron, you name their Tron lands. But we do struggle against decks that have value across the board, like Jund, and that's where our support cards come in. Like Assassin's Trophy for green and a black, we can destroy target permanent an opponent controls, and they get the choice of searching for a land and putting it onto the battlefield. Now, this is a May ability, so they don't have to do so, but if they do, that triggers both our Probe and Nixilis. Inquisition Kozilek is a good way to get rid of stuff we can't deal with straight off the bat, and it activates our Graveyard Hate and Surgical Extraction and Extirpate. We're also running 2 Fabricates to search for a Psychogenic Probe or to search for our Ensnaring Bridge, which we're running 3 of. Now Ensnaring Bridge brings the whole game to a grind. As you've seen, we don't have much card draw, so we're happy having an empty hand and letting Ensnaring Bridge protect us from attacking creatures. Finally, we're running 4 Sylvan Caryatid. It's my go-to mana dork because it is hexproof, and 3 Baby Jaces, which allows us to draw a card and then discard a card to stay at a net hand size that Ensnaring Bridge can keep us safe at. His Planeswalker form allows us to power down the opponent's creatures. It allows us to recast or shuffle cards from our graveyard, and if we get to our ult, we can slowly mill our opponents as well. For a land base, we're running 6 fetches. I didn't want to go too heavy on the fetches because Psychogenic Probe does hit us as well. We are running some Shocks and Breeding Pool, Overgrown Tomb, and Watery Grave. And we're also running 2 Creeping Tar Pits that can deal some nice unblockable damage for us, even with the Ensnaring Bridge if we hold up our hand to let it go through. We're running 2 Field of Ruin for land destruction, but it also forces our opponent to search and shuffle their deck, meaning it'll trigger Psychogenic Probe and Nixilis. We're rounding out this mana base of 21 lands with 3 swamps, 2 forests, and an island. In the sideboard, we're running 3 Chalice of the Void simply to get rid of 1-drops that are in all the decks, and that really puts a damper on most decks. It hits mana dorks, cantrips, combo pieces. Yeah, it does hit our Inquisition of Kozilek and our Graveyard Hate, but we can just swap them out if we know we're swapping Chalice of the Void in. It's not that big of a deal. Running 2 Damnations to wipe the board. We don't run too many creatures, so we don't mind if we have to destroy them all. Dismember for targeted removal. We got more removal here, but this is more focuses for artifacts and enchantments we might run into. We have another Assassin's Trophy, a Maelstrom Pulse, and a Naturalize, and then we have even more exile cards. Praetor's Grasp only looks for 1 card, but if they're running colors that we like, we could potentially take a card that we want to play and then play it for ourselves. We have another Lost Legacy. If they're not running a lot of artifacts, we can take out our main board Dispossess and put in our Lost Legacy, and vice versa, we're running another Dispossess. If we run into an artifact heavy deck, we can bring out a Lost Legacy and bring in another Dispossess. We have even more Graveyard Hate in Haunting Echoes and Surgical Extraction. Haunting Echoes is basically a surgical extraction for their whole graveyard, so if we run into a deck that relies heavily on their graveyard, like Dredge, then we basically exile their whole deck in the process. And that's the deck. If you do have the card lying around, you could piece it together and see how it plays. It does play pretty well, but again, it's not budget, so you might not want to buy all these just to make this deck. Anyways, if you like this, like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good shit, and I'll see you next time. Keep having fun, guys.